The Evil Within 2. I think in some ways it's better than the original, but in other ways worse. First of all, what's better? The gameplay is in general better, and the biggest thing is that the boss fights are actually all pretty good this time around, which could not be said for the last game. And this game also looks insanely good, besides the character models, but even in 2024 some games struggle with that. But what's worse about it? Well, in general, I would sum it up by saying this game lacks the aura of the original. I think that comes down to a couple things. First is that there's really no mystery in this game, which makes sense because it's a sequel, but also in the original you had really no idea what the fuck was going on for like half the game. And even then you only kind of knew what was happening. The other thing that takes away from it for me is some of the changes they made to the characters. So all returning characters have different voice actors, and I think one of the three examples is actually an improvement. Kidman sounds a lot better. She was pretty monotone in the first game, and I would say I like her new voice better.
Hello, Sebastian. It's been a long time.
The crash. I wasn't alone. Where is everybody?
Now, the other two, being Sebastian and the Administrator, are... depends. So I think the Administrator's new voice is 100% a downgrade. In the first game he sounded a lot like the G-Man from Half-Life, which he just so happens to look a lot like too. That's a good thing though. That was fire. The G-Man is sick, and so was the Administrator in the first game.
I need you focused. I need your attention. This is a serious matter. Everything we do is a serious matter.
I'm ready.
I'd like to think so, but conviction must be proven with action.
In this one though, he kind of just sounds like a regular guy. A definite downgrade in my opinion.
Imagine it. Millions of minds connected together. Happiness for one is happiness for all.
Now when it comes to Sebastian, I don't think his new voice actor did a bad job at all. However, he plays a completely different character than the original Sebastian. Seb in the first game was pretty much just an emotionless asshole, which is how the usual gritty detective archetype goes. In this game, he's much more emotive. One example of this is his reaction to seeing a giant monster. Let's compare Seb 1 to 2.
God damn it.
Oh, shit.
Holy shit.
I feel like Seb 1 sounds more like frustrated by the fact he's getting attacked by a giant monster, whereas Seb 2 actually sounds scared. But he also just shows a lot more emotion in general, even to strangers he barely knows. Seb 1 barely even talked to his partner Joseph, let alone some random Mobius agents. Now, I've seen a lot of people say they actually prefer Sebastian in the second game. I think that's totally valid because he is a much easier character to like. But I don't know, I really liked how much of an asshole Seb was in the first game. But enough about all that. If you haven't seen my video recapping The Evil Within 1, which at the time of writing, no one has, let me very briefly outline the story. So this shadowy organization called Mobius worked with a psychopathic rich kid named Ruvik to create a device called STEM. STEM was capable of linking multiple people's brains together in a world hosted by the core of STEM, which at the time was Ruvik. To make a long story short, Ruvik was an asshole, so Mobius cut his brain out and made him live inside of STEM. Ruvik, however, was a sadistic freak, so STEM was an absolute nightmare world. Mobius wanted to use STEM to subtly connect the consciousness of everyone on the planet at once to control their minds. They didn't want to subject everyone to Ruvik's nightmare world, so they found a suitable replacement for Ruvik, this mentally ill kid named Leslie. Unfortunately, Leslie was with Dr. Jimenez, a man who has worked with Ruvik and Mobius to create STEM. Jimenez was developing a wireless form of STEM for Mobius. The normal STEM works through these kind of bathtub terminals that you have to be manually hooked into. Jimenez was going to test it out before Mobius was ready, so they sent their newest agent, Kidman, who was undercover as a junior detective under Sebastian Castellanos and his partner, Joseph Oda, to stop Jimenez and recover Leslie. Sebastian had once had a wife and kid, Myra and Lily, but Lily is presumed to have died in a fire, and Myra went missing investigating Mobius. When Kidman, Seb, and Joseph arrived at Beacon Mental Hospital, where Jimenez is, the doctor activated the wireless stem and brought them all into Ruvik's world. Ruvik would then try to kill them all in various ways, and the events of the first game happen. At the end of the first game, Kidman had tried to betray Mobius by killing Leslie, but failed as Seb stopped her. Ruvik would then transfer his mind into Leslie's, Seb would destroy Ruvik's brain, and they'd all escape STEM, where Mobius assumed the mission had been accomplished, as Leslie was extracted. Somehow, Ruvik and Leslie's body escaped Mobius and got back into the real world, where for some reason he would not return in the second game. Kidman remained undercover where she found out that Seb's wife Myra was now working for STEM, and Sebastian would escape STEM and now have to tell his batshit insane story to the rest of his department. Alright, so that's the first game. Now let's get into the second. The game begins with a dream Sebastian's having of the night his house burned down and the night he lost his daughter. He searches his burning house for any sign of Lily, but when he finds her, she only shames him for not being there to protect her. Now, I didn't get the impression that Seb was actually at the house during the fire in this game, or the first one. I think this is all completely just a dream. But he wakes up from the dream inside of a bar 3 years after the events of the first game. He seems to be pretty hammered, which to be fair, he was also an alcoholic in the first game, but now it seems that he was fired from his job at the Crimson City PD. Apparently they tried to get him a psychologist because they didn't believe anything he was saying. I don't really think this makes much sense because at the end of the first game, we saw that the STEM terminal room was still very much there in Beacon Hospital, so the cops would have found it. I think that maybe Mobius greased a couple pockets to get the police to drop the investigation. Speaking of Mobius, Kidman is back and sitting directly across from Sebastian at his booth. Seb, of course, is pretty hostile to her. He was under the impression that she was not only the bad guy in the first game, but also that she killed his partner Joseph. Kidman tells Sebastian that his daughter isn't dead and that Mobius has her, but they need his help in order to save her. Seb is of course shocked at this news and he punches these two losers before being sedated by Kidman. We wake up inside of a Mobius facility strapped to a wheelchair and are taken to meet our daughter. Turns out that Mobius made her into the core of their new STEM device. They apparently needed someone young and innocent so that the STEM world wouldn't be a total shit show like it was with Ruvik. At some point though, she went missing within STEM and then the world started falling apart around them. That's why Kidman and the administrator want Sebastian to go into STEM and find his daughter because their own recovery teams failed. Now this kind of paints Mobius as incompetent, but to be fair, they weren't the most competent in the first game either. I mean, they had to send their rookie agent Kidman to stop a single psychologist from ruining their plans, so... Anyway, Kidman hints that there's someone else inside of STEM waiting for Sebastian as well, and then he's sent into the terminal. Now to be honest, I think this opening kinda sucks. Later on we'll learn a reason why Kidman wanted Sebastian to go into STEM, but I have no idea why the administrator would agree to this. The writing in this game in general is kinda iffy, but let's just continue. We come into this dark, watery type area where after a few distressing visions we arrive at this game's version of the safe haven. This time it's Seb's old office at Crimson PD. Kidman confirms to us that we safely arrived in STEM and we can begin the search. She also encourages us to search for the missing agents Mobius sent in. We'll meet a lot of them later. When we first exit the safe haven, we get a vision of Seb's home life before everything went to shit. He looks a little weird, clean-shaven, but we're quickly woken up from the dream as we enter Union, the town that STEM was made to look like. Well, that's where we were supposed to go anyway, but we find ourselves in this fancy hotel-type area. This place is pretty ominous, and we immediately find some kind of murder scene frozen in time. When you enter this area around the scene, you get blasted with classical music, which is honestly kind of a banger, and you get to see how the murder played out. This guy was one of the agents Mobius sent in, the team leader in fact, and it looks like someone blew his brains out and took a nice little picture of it. There's not much question about who did this as we enter another room and see one of these murder scenes created in real time. This guy named Stefano slashes some dude's throat and freezes it in time, and we then have to sneak past him. Now I'm not gonna lie, Stefano is kind of a cringe villain, especially compared to the other main villain in the game, but we don't know much about him yet, so let's just continue. As we continue through the hotel, we can find more of Stefano's art projects, these being sculptures made out of dead bodies. Great. After Stefano snaps a picture of Seb where his jawline is looking magnificent, we get attacked by this fucking thing. These are called Guardians, and they're basically just a giant flesh monster made of the remains of some of Stefano's victims. I think they look pretty sick, but my favorite part is how they'll just maniacally giggle as it chases you down. After running from the Guardian, we have no weapon yet. Seb sees the light at the end of the tunnel, but before we can reach it, Stefano reappears and sticks a knife in our chest. This allows the Guardian to catch up and grab us with its weird arms, but Seb manages to escape by using the knife in his chest. Finally, we escape the hotel and find ourselves in the actual Union. Just down the street from where we dropped in, we find this crazy lady feeding some kind of slop to this guy. Her son, I think. Anyway, she ends up slamming his face into the table so many times he dies before noticing Sebastian and rushing him. These are called the Lost, and they're basically just zombies. They're like the Haunted from the first game, except they're much more disgusting looking and they don't use guns. After killing her, we can continue down the road and find ourselves in the actual town of Union. This is actually more or less an open world area for this chapter, which is kinda cool, except Union is maybe the least scary area in any horror game. Mobius created Union to see just how well they can mind control people inside of STEM in a relatively normal environment. Their goal is to use the wireless STEM to mind control everyone in the world at once, controlling both what they see and think. So this is a good start. The town is overrun by zombies though, and we see 2 Mobius agents getting attacked right away. One of them dies and the other escapes into this house. When we enter the house, we learn his name is Liam O'Neill. He's a tech who was sent in here to perform some repairs to hopefully stabilize the environment. Seb's not interested in that nerd shit though, so O'Neill tells us that we can use our communicator to follow Lily's signal and hopefully find her. When we exit O'Neill's room, we catch a glimpse of the nurse from the first game, Tatiana. They also changed her voice actor, but the new one does a pretty good job of sounding as deadpan as the original.
Face. Even if that face has seen far too much. You look tired, Detective. I can help you get back in shape.
Anyway, when we go back to Sebastian's room, we find that we can now sit in this wheelchair, which turns out to be the brain-shocking device from the first game. Giving yourself brain damage gives you upgrades but costs green gel, which most enemies drop. The only real difference here is that Tatiana is all like sultry now, and we don't get to hear Sebastian cry out in pain each time he shocks himself. So you decide whether that's a downgrade or upgrade. Anyway, when we exit O'Neill's safe house, we see that when they said that Union was unstable, they weren't lying. Earthquakes are causing entire sections of the city to fall underground, and some parts are floating in the air. At this point, you can run around the city doing a couple side quests, such as finding the missing agents and shit. Now, most of the enemies you encounter here are the normal zombies, but there's also these big gas bag type enemies. They're called laments, and they make a pretty cool sound as they just wander around. There's a really good moment later where you're trapped in a room with one of these guys, and that sound just echoes around constantly. It's pretty sick. But anyway, we eventually find a resonance point, basically a spot that allows us to see a memory, and this one shows us what happened to Lily. We see her running from something inside of this diner, but she escaped through a window in the back. When we go to check out this window, we're attacked by these dogs. But we then have to track down 2 more resonance points before finding that she hid out in this warehouse. Inside the warehouse, we see our final memory, and it's of Stefano kidnapping her. As we exit the warehouse, the artist himself appears to taunt us. This giant camera eye tentacle thing appears in the sky and covers Stefano's escape to City Hall, a building which is currently floating upside down in the air. Union then gets populated by even more enemies, including apparently a floating knife, but we then have to go back to O'Neill to figure out how to get to City Hall. At his safe house, O'Neill tells us that to get to City Hall, we'll need to use a series of tunnels called the Marrow. He calls them kind of backstage passageways. The Marrow exists outside of the same realm as Union. Mobius staff use them to observe and get around Union without disturbing things. For some reason, Sebastian can't grasp this concept, even though in the last game we frequently did shit like fall through solid walls and get teleported into entirely different environments, so maybe he's just stupid. Anyway, O'Neill gives us a gas mask to deal with apparent gas leaks in the Marrow before sending us off with a pat on the ass. Not actually, but it would have been nice. Anyway, we can then use a nearby computer to send ourselves into the Marrow. It's pretty much as you would expect, a bunch of industrial tunnels. But they do have a lot of vending machines down here, which would be needed to work in such a depressing environment. Anyway, we eventually come across that gas leak O'Neill mentions, and we get sent into first-person mode, but we can't use any guns because the gas is flammable. We have to sneak past a few enemies, including one of the laments, before finding our way to exit B2, the one that takes us right outside City Hall. Stefano was awaiting our arrival, because as soon as we see him, he retreats into City Hall and closes the entrance behind him. We then have to fight one of those giant guardians, and that's kinda cool because you can actually destroy the individual heads on the monster, but once we kill it, the doors open and we enter City Hall. Inside we find a dying Mobius agent who tells us that inside City Hall is a device called a stable field emitter. It should both prevent Union from falling apart and weaken Stefano. We have to solve a little puzzle, and then appreciate some of Stefano's art, which really just boils down to pictures of people mid-death. We then go through this pretty trippy section, which culminates with us getting attacked by some sort of camera monster in a dark room. The camera beast conveniently teleports us right in front of the stable field emitter, but Sebastian becomes aware of Stefano lurking behind him. Before Seb can act, Stefano takes his picture, freezing him in time and pretty much leaving him 100% vulnerable to death. I mean, the story would be over right here if Stefano wasn't such a little bitch. Stefano tells Seb that someone else, someone even more powerful than himself, had him capture Lily. This person is who granted him these powers. The only human with any kind of supernatural powers inside of STEM in the first game was Ruvik, and that was because he was the core of STEM. Anyway, he says that he'll be given even more power if he brings Lily to this individual. He doesn't kill Seb here, only scratches him on the cheek. I don't know why, but whenever games or movies or whatever show knives very slowly cutting people, it always just makes me super uncomfortable. But Stefano then leaves Sebastian to be dealt with by another of his creations, Obscura. But before we proceed, let me fill you in on Stefano's backstory. So he was a war photographer who ended up losing his eye in an explosion. He ended up taking a picture of this explosion at the perfect time to see the man in front of him get eviscerated by it. This gave him the obsession we see today with photographing people mid-death. Now, why the fuck would Mobius put someone like this into STEM? We'll learn in a bit that it wasn't exactly intentional. Anyway, Obscura is another very cool looking monster. It's this kind of mannequin looking thing with an old-fashioned camera on its face. The stable field emitter takes 90 seconds to boot up, but Obscura can pause time with her pictures just like Stefano. So you have to hold her off while the machine turns on. You can either play hide and seek and just shoot her whenever she freezes the machine, or do what I did in my second playthrough and bully her the entire time. Anyway, once the emitter is on, Obscura fades away for now and we manage to stabilize the environment somewhat. Outside we have a heart-to-heart with Kidman, where we see the administrator sitting on this throne in the background. Now I don't really know about that one, it seems a little out of character for him, but Kidman says that she spent a lot of time with Lily during her training, so she's invested in this whole thing too. Now there's not much question where Stefano escaped, as we can see his giant eye monster hovering over another floating building. Radioing O'Neill, he tells us that it's the old theater and gives us another route through the marrow that'll get us there. Re-entering the marrow, we find that a new entrance has opened and find these tunnels filled with... I don't know what else I call this besides what it is. This tunnel is covered in giant puddles of cum. I mean, this shit's everywhere. We find the owner of this goon cave not far in, and it's a giant cum monster. Now you can either sneak past it or just shoot the shit out of it, but either way it'll grab you right as you try to escape. There's some pretty nasty monsters in these games, but I think this is probably the last one I'd want to grab me. After shooting the seaman a little more, we manage to escape and find another Mobius safe room. Now I will not be elaborating on the cum monster for a while because 1, it does come back later, and 2, I want you to ruminate on it for a while. Anyway, we're not alone in this safe room, as another Mobius agent, Yukiko Hoffman, is in here. She was the team's psychologist and she actually recognizes our name as Lily's dad. Apparently Lily and everyone else were told that Seb was dead, which Mobius may have thought true after the first game. It's not entirely clear. Anyway, she's also the person who was in charge of vetting everyone who entered STEM. She's supposedly great at this and no one got past her except obviously Stefano. She agrees that he's a psychopath, but justifies her failures as saying that he's a high-functioning psychopath. I wouldn't be surprised if she also claims to be a body language expert at this point. Anyway, we're looking for exit D5, which is just around the corner. Taking the exit deposits us right outside the theater. The theater's closed though, and Stefano says that the only way he'll let us in is if we go and appreciate his art a little more. Heading to 2 places in town, we can find his art there, and Seb even comments that...
This is art? It's just a photo.
Rather than appreciating his art though, Hoffman gave us the idea that destroying his art might weaken Stefano, because he's a psychopath and they're apparently very self-centered people. I mean, I think destroying most artists' work would probably cause damage to them, but let's do it. Before we can knife his picture though, we get sucked into it where we have to witness Stefano's artistic process. A process which is basically just torturing people. We then have to do this little electrified barbed wire section before we can destroy the sculpture in the middle of the room. Now, I thought Stefano was a photographer, not a sculptor, but I guess he's a man of many talents. Obscura and the Guardians, which there are many more of around here, are examples of Stefano's sculptures. Speaking of Obscura, when we head into the next painting, she's there waiting for us. We have to sneak past her to get a key that lets us do another barbed wire puzzle, then destroy Steph's other sculpture. Doing this opens the way to the theater where we can have our final showdown against the so-called artist. As we make our way through the theater, we hear all about how Mobius tried to rewrite Stefano and everyone else inside Union's memories, but that didn't work on him. When we arrive at the main theater, we find ourselves surrounded by a bunch of tied-up people with hoods on their faces. Stefano then blows all their heads up and says a very cringy line.
Picasso had his blue period. I have entered my crimson period.
One of his many lines that suck, and we have to fight him. Before that though, have you ever played Batman Arkham Knight? Well, in that game there's these sections where you have to hide from Scarecrow in this dream world type place. Well, I guess the devs really like that part of the game, because you have to do the exact same thing here. hiding from Stefano's camera eye thing while it scans around the environment. For me, the game decided that this part was so good that it crashed in order to make me play it over again. It also erased my recording leading up to the fight, which is just great. But anyway, after clearing this dumbass section, we get to fight Stefano himself. It's actually a pretty fun fight. You have to shoot him in between teleports while classical music blasts in the background, but after doing this enough, we finally managed to kill Stefano, and can I just say thank God for that. I mean, this guy belongs in a CW show. That's the level of writing we're talking about here. Now, this game has a much bigger focus on human villains than the last, which were mostly just entities, and I'm glad to say that the next villain is leagues better than this fucking guy. But with Stefano dead, we can finally go to reclaim Lily. She's skeptical, of course, because she's been told that her dad was dead, but just as she's about to come around, the Semen Demon reappears. It turns out that the controller of the cum is none other than Myra, Sebastian's wife. She takes Lily from us under the guise of protecting her and sicks her cum monster on us, knocking us into a pit that brings us back into Sebastian's room. Now, according to the wiki, the white substance that Myra controls is supposed to be something called psychoplasm, which as far as I can tell is a substance people used to think made up the consciousness. But you know, the thing is, psychoplasm isn't real, so I have no idea why they decided to make it appear white. I mean, it could have been any other color. You can't tell me that no one in the Tango Gameworks office realized what this looks like, but I guess from now on I'll call it psychoplasm. Maybe. Probably not, but we'll see. Anyway, after we return to Seb's room, we see that the usual way out, via mirror, has been replaced by the strange shrine, which means it's time to talk about the Church of Mew, or Mew Centers as they're called in-game. So in the first game, there was this church that was experimenting on people in this dank catacombs under their town to try to combine two minds together into one. Their experiments were very crude and literally involved stitching two people together. Mobius funded this church, but after finding Ruvik, who made a machine that could do exactly what they wanted without making horrific monsters, they abandoned the church. Well, it seems that this high-ranking Mobius official named Theodore liked their logo, as the Mew Centers have almost the same exact cross. Anyway, he started the Mew Centers, and they preached that you as an individual are so insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe, you should simply give up your freedom to the church and work towards something greater as a collective. Now, Theodore didn't actually really believe any of this. He just wanted a congregation completely subservient to him. Anyway, speaking of catacombs, we're transported into another set of them, much like the ones from the first game. At this point, I feel like this game actually gets good. I mean, Stefano and Union were just so boring and kind of cringe in Steph's case, but this place and the next villain are actually pretty cool. As we make our way through the catacombs, we find that they've also been doing some fucked up things down here, mainly related to burning people alive. We hear the voice of Theodore guiding us along, trying to get us to become what he calls a truth seeker. This is what Stefano was, and that's why he was so powerful, although Stefano in the end said fuck all that, and was trying to take Lily for himself. We eventually see another vision of Seb's burning house, but this time we're grabbed by one of these flame zombies and forcibly thrown back into the real world where we have to fight them. This whole section is Theodore trying to break Sebastian down. We can hear Lily's voice scolding us for not saving her, but underneath her voice you can hear Seb's own voice whispering behind it.
You only love your wife. You refuse to see.
It's all
Your fault. You are a failure. Your daughter is lost because of you. You couldn't save her.
These are obviously very huge points of guilt and trauma for Seb, and Theodore is using that to try to break him. To what end? Well, after solving a puzzle, we get to meet Theodore himself, and he says that he too wants to save Lily from the possessed Myra. Of course, he wants to do this to steal her power, but it would seem we're on the same side for now. Theodore will only help Sebastian if he gives up his freedom and joins Theodore's flock, becoming some kind of flame monster in the process. And man, let me just say, I was talking about aura earlier, this guy definitely has it. I can't express how much of a step up Theodore is from Stefano. But of course, Sebastian refuses this offer, and Theodore washes us away in a wave of blood, telling us that we can come find him of our own accord if we wish to change our mind. We wake up and basically knocked Darren Tone from COD Zombies, I mean, pretty much, and we've somehow been saved by this lady. The house is under attack by zombies though, we have to help her fight them off. I mean, there's even boards on the window, like this shit is definitely just COD Zombies. Anyway, her name is Esmeralda, and after we survive a couple more waves of zombies, she fills us in on who she is. It's not clear how we ended up here, but she's a Mobius agent working with a small group of other agents to free Lily and take down Mobius. The others being Myra, Kidman, and Theodore. Well, we see how well things went for Theo and Myra, but Esmeralda seems to be doing alright for herself. Once we escape Noct, we head towards Esmeralda's safe house, Seb getting called old by her the whole way.
You need a break after that, old man?
Come on. I'm not that old.
Gonna have to duck. Don't blow your back out.
This isn't the time, Torres.
Walking the way to her safe house though, is a bunch of those fire zombies. We also see one of these fucking sick looking flamethrower guys here. but we don't get to fight him yet. Once we make it to Esmeralda's safe house, we fail her on how both Myra and Theodore don't exactly seem to be following the plan. We also radio Kidman and tell her that we've met Esmeralda and learned about her plan, covertly of course, and then decide that we need to call O'Neill again so that he can help us locate Theodore. To reach O'Neill, we need to head through the Marrow once again. Not far into the Marrow, we see a memory where Hoffman was apparently called by O'Neill into a restricted area of the lab, so we follow in her footsteps. Entering the restricted lab reveals some pretty big things to us. Mainly that people were turning into Lost long before the core escaped. It was only something like 0.05% of the population, but it was still happening. Why could this be, though? Well, a little further into the lab, the air suddenly gets all chilly, and we hear this whispering voice. We then get attacked by this ghost lady, and I have to say this is probably the most effective horror moment in either Evil Within game. The main reason for this is that the ghost, called the Anima, will whisper to you through the controller speaker on PlayStation. Now, I'm sure it's not going to come through well on the recording, but it's creepy as fuck.
It's searching for me.
Now, what is this Anima, and how is it related with people turning into Lost? Well, if you do the side content of this game, you can actually encounter this thing many times throughout the game. Each time it harasses you and tries to steal your soul, turning you into a Lost. Mobius logs say that everyone who turned into a Lost exhibited symptoms like paranoia and insomnia. This is because they were being haunted by this fucking thing. At a certain point, even Mobius agents started to be affected by it. Now in the last game, people turned into Haunted, the equivalent of the Lost from the first game. And that was because Ruvik psychologically and physically tortured them until he broke their minds. Now it's important to mention that Ruvik built the original stem only to work when his brain was connected to it. So with all this in mind, this Anima that turns people into Lost is likely some kind of leftover entity from the part of STEM that Ruvik built. Ruvik made STEM to be able to completely dominate a person's will, and it seems like that's what Anima is doing when she turns people into zombies, just like Ruvik did with the Haunted. Again, I tell you that Mobius is a very incompetent organization. Anyway, Anima is fucking awesome, but once we escape the Ghost Woman, we need to get our hands on one of the brain chips implanted into Mobius agents in order to open this door. We do this by using this brain surgery device to drill a hole into this guy's head. And I fully expected him to wake up during this, but he didn't. With the brain chip in hand, we continue through the labs and find another Mobius safe house. We can hear Hoffman inside talking to someone. When Seb busts the door down, we see her talking to one of those flamethrower guys from earlier. It turns out that this is O'Neill. Somehow Theodore got to him and managed to make him into one of his faithful. This is why I said that Seb would have had to become some kind of fire monster to join Theodore, because it seems like all of his followers do. Anyway, we then have a boss fight against the former technician, where you have to use the environment, like these sprinklers, to put out the fires O'Neill starts. Once we defeat him, he comes to his senses in his last moments and begs us to destroy the device Theodore had him build. Hoffman also tells us that Theodore was the head of recruitment in Mobius, which is why he's so powerful within the organization. We call in Esmeralda, who loads it up with C4, but as soon as we blow up the device, we're transported straight into Theodore's world, which is a super cool looking swamp area. So we make our way through the Blood Swamp, where we're introduced to another new enemy type, these giant exploding guys. We're following a signal that sounds like Lily's voice. Of course, it isn't actually her, but Theodore once again trying to wear down Sebastian. Throughout the level, we hear more voice lines of Lily shaming Sebastian for not being there to save her, culminating in Theodore showing Sebastian a vision of a burnt-up Lily. He continues to play on Sebastian's guilt for not saving his daughter, and it seems like he's just about broken the man. Seb's about to shoot Theodore, but at the last second he's replaced by Esmeralda, once again giving Seb something to be guilty about as he shoots the agent. Seb then passes out and we see Esmeralda trying to get us to safety, but she's overwhelmed by Lost and killed. Sebastian then has another vision, this one inside of his old home with Myra. Seb's wallowing in his guilt even more when Myra tells him to stop being a dumb little bitch. I mean, she says it a lot nicer than that, but that basically sums it up. Now obviously this isn't actually Myra, it's just Sebastian finally forgiving himself for letting Lily die in the fire. Except as Myra points out, she didn't die in a fire. Lily disappearing was not because of any kind of negligence on Seb's part, she was kidnapped by a secret society who needed her for their experiments. Seb and Myra were literally just detectives at a city police department. Neither of them had the power to fight Mobius. There was basically no way Seb could have prevented them from taking Lily, and finally coming to terms with this ruins Theodore's attempts to control Sebastian. He wakes up back in Hoffman's safe house where it turns out Esmeralda died from her wounds, not the gunshot though, from being mauled by zombies. Seb has kind of a strange reaction.
Damn it. She didn't have to die like that. She was a good soldier.
but he learns that destroying O'Neill's device allowed Theodore's stronghold to appear inside of Union. Except it's protected by a wall of fire. Hoffman says she might have a plan, but Seb needs to clear the way for her first. When we step out into Union, we find that it's overrun by Theodore's minions, mostly the fire zombies, but there's also 2 more of those flamethrower guys. Interestingly, when you kill both of them, you get enough components to build your own flamethrower, which initially I was like, why the fuck would I need a flamethrower when all the enemies are immune to fire? But it's actually pretty clever. You'll see in a minute. Anyway, we fight our way through Union to this hotel, where we meet up with Hoffman once again. She says she's finished a prototype O'Neill was working on for a portable, stable field emitter. The emitter should disrupt the flames surrounding Theodore's stronghold long enough for us to get in. The radius around it is pretty damn small though, so we have to stick close to Hoffman and defend from fire zombies for a while. The emitter also breaks a couple times, the last of which results in Hoffman getting bogged down by zombies and burned by the flames. Seb barely made it out though. Well, that was the last Mobius agent. Now there is one more you can meet named Sykes. You can actually help escape STEM, but fuck Mobius, I'm not saving any of their agents. Anyway, we now have to scale Theodore's stronghold, yet another very cool looking area. As we scale to the top of the stronghold, we get to hear why everyone is trying to take over Union, after Sebastian rightfully points out,
Why does everyone want to control Union? It's not even real.
Union is better than reality. Union is soulless. Their minds are connected to it. To control Union is to control them. To control them is to control the world.
So basically, if you take over Union, you'll be able to mind control Mobius agents in real life through their brain chips. Again, we see that Mobius is super incompetent. Theo also said that to control Mobius is to control the world. Now that might make you think Mobius is really this all-powerful organization, but I take this to mean that once he gains control of Mobius, he can have them deploy the wireless stem across the world, allowing him to get access to everyone else. Anyway, we eventually reach the top of the stronghold and come face to face with Theodore. He once again tries to break Sebastian by showing him Lily on fire, but Seb doesn't give a fuck anymore since he's achieved inner peace or whatever. So Theodore has to pull on some other traumas, in this case being the horrific beasts he encountered within Beacon Mental Hospital in the first game. However, there was no trauma going on in the first game. Seb was an absolute menace in that game, killing everything in his path. First is the Chainsaw Sadist, which is the first enemy you ever encounter, and also the only one you never get to get your revenge on. Seb finally does though, and we get maybe the hardest scene in this game.
Not this time. You think this will stop me? Fuck you.
Next is the Keeper, probably my favorite enemy in the original, even if he is somewhat of a Pyramid Head knockoff. The Keeper only respawns 3 times though, but after downing it, by far the most annoying enemy in the first game appears, Laura, the Shrieking Beast. She still has her one-shot attack this time around, but remember that flamethrower I mentioned earlier? Laura is super weak to fire, so if you built that flamethrower you can just cook her in a few seconds. Very cool, I was definitely not losing my shit when this happened in my first playthrough. Anyway, this was easily the best part of this game. The only bad thing is that you didn't have to fight more enemies in the first game, like the Amalgam or something like that. With Laura defeated, Sebastian snaps out of Theodore's trance and is about to kill the cult leader when Myra does it for us. Even after Theo stabs her in the throat, she seems unaffected and finishes the job. Now, Myra seems content to live within STEM forever as long as Lily is safe, which of course Seb can't allow. She brings down a whole building on us with her psychoplasm, and we wake up to find Union falling apart at the seams. In the wreckage, we meet Myra again, and she briefly regains control over herself, only to tell Sebastian to leave before she ends up hurting him. She's convinced that only she can protect Lily. We then have to follow her through the remnants of Union, fighting her cum zombies along the way, culminating in a fight with a giant one wielding a telephone pole as a weapon. It's pretty cool, but once we clear that, we finally catch up with Myra again. In one last attempt to get rid of us, she basically destroys what's left of the Union, leaving only dust and what looks to be our old house sitting on a hill. If there's anywhere where we'll find Lily, it's going to be in there. as we walk through the wasteland, we get to see exactly how Myra's plan fell apart, and it all comes down to Theodore. So this guy, the head of recruitment and a very high-ranking Mobius employee, somehow found out about this plan and decided to join them. Kidman is even suspicious of this, but Myra accepts his help. However, as soon as they find Lily within Union, Theodore reveals his true plan to take over Mobius using Lily. A fight ensues between himself and Myra, which results in Lily running away into town. This would be when she was running from Stefano and ended up getting captured by him, but of course to eventually get saved by Myra and Sebastian. When we arrive at the house, Myra's there again, and she reaffirms that she's not willing to let Lily leave STEM. Seb then gives a heartwarming speech, and if I'm being honest, I think the whole reason why they changed his character so much might be so that he could give a speech like this. Seb 1 would never have said half the things he does in this speech, but Myra loses herself to the psychoplasm once again, and Sebastian has to shoot his wife in between the eyes. She's not dead though. Far from it actually, as she transforms into this absolute monstrosity. You have to shoot glowing weak points on her, which is super original, and the first is her seemingly pregnant belly. When you shoot it, it explodes with a bunch of little spiders. Disgusting, but you can then shoot off an arm, which then attacks you, and finally you shoot off the other arm and can finish off Myra's psychoplasm monster for good. Myra herself is still alive, however. She tells Sebastian to go find Lily. She'll catch up with them there. As Seb runs towards his daughter, we get to see what Kidman's been up to. With Sebastian having retrieved the core, his usefulness has run out for Mobius. They order Kidman to give him his final orders, to extract the core and prepare a medical team to kill him afterwards. Kidman can't allow this. Just as the administrator notices her disobedience, he makes a couple weird hand gestures before Kidman just domes his two guards. I really like how the admin shows zero fear here even when Kidman's about to kill him. It's good stuff. Anyway, Kidman, who barely fought anything in the first game, shoots up Mobius HQ as she runs toward the STEM room to save Seb. We then cut back to Sebastian. He finds Lily and takes her downstairs to meet with Myra. They're finally all going to be reunited and live as one big happy family, except no. Myra's plan was never to extract from STEM. She wanted to get Lily out and have Kidman deliver her to Sebastian, while Myra herself becomes the core of STEM. As the core, Myra would be able to send out a signal through the brain chips inside of Mobius agents' heads to detonate and kill them all at once. However, to do that, she needs to remain inside of STEM until the very end, so Seb once again has to say goodbye to his wife as he heads for extraction with Lily. Back in the real world, Kidman kills some more guards and makes her way to the STEM room, where she just executes the two doctors trying to kill Seb. The administrator reappears and we get this kind of cringy but decent dialogue exchange between them.
Otherwise, the punishment for your betrayal will be legendary.
I'm going to be legendary, all right. Legendary for taking you down! A world without choice isn't a utopia. A hive mind only works with a queen that controls it. Join us or die? Well, guess what? There's a third choice. And that's fuck you!
You are foolish! But oddly admirable.
As she waits for Seb to extract. This culminates with the admin trying to detonate Kidman's own chip. However, it's revealed that she had her chip removed a while ago. Makes sense considering her plan. Back in STEM, Seb and Lily barely make it back to the safe haven and look into the mirror, which should take them into the real world. A real world where Kidman just received a message from Myra telling her that the code was ready to execute. She presses enter, and suddenly the team of guards trying to drill into the room stop. They are, of course, lying outside the door dead. The administrator manages to hold on a little longer though, but even he can't handle an explosive device in his brain for long. Probably hundreds of people just died with that button press, but fuck them, because Seb wakes up and immediately tries to pry his daughter out of her container, even though it's already opening. He finally manages to get her out. Since everyone in the building is dead, Kidman and Seb get to walk right out of the building. The post-credit scene first shows Kidman and Seb parting ways, then we get to see Seb and Lily literally driving off into the sunset. The second scene shows us that STEM is still online and the Myra is presumably still alive as the core within STEM. Cool. Now we know there's not going to be a third one of these because Tango Gameworks got shut down by Microsoft. Let's talk about where this leaves the Evil Within universe. So Mobius is not gone. They certainly have other branches which wouldn't have these chips in their heads, and they might even have other STEM machines running their own experiments. The administrator is dead, but judging by his title, he's not the end-all be-all of Mobius. He was likely just responsible for directly managing their projects. So in the next game, Mobius might come back looking for Lily to make her into another STEM device, and Sebastian might be forced back into STEM to kill Myra, who would be mucking it up like Ruvik in the first game. Alright, well, that's the story. I didn't really like the ending, it almost felt a little too perfect for me. I mean, they did drive off into the sunset, but it's whatever. In general, I think this game is a little worse than the first. I mentioned before that the gameplay is better, and while I do think that, it's also just super different. The first one was much more Resident Evil 5 or 6, while this one's way more Last of Us. Whatever. I hope you like this dumbass video. Leave a dislike if you don't like me, or leave a like if you're not a loser.